Hello, I'm Neal Petersen. I want to talk about transformation. I'm sitting in our garden, and this tree behind me is a tree that constantly goes through major transformations. At a certain time of the year, this tree is completely covered. Every branch has leaves on it. And then, as the winter comes, all the leaves fall and it becomes this bare tree. And we just think of it as a bare tree in winter. But it allows the sun to come into the space that I want the winter sun into. And then, late winter, with all the leaves gone, it starts to form this little structure that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, taller, phallic structure. And then, just after sunset, it peels open, bursts open to this incredible flower. And this flower attracts the hummingbirds, attracts the bees, attracts the moths. And it stays open for just one night. And at the end of one whole day, after all these creatures have fed, it falls to the ground. And eventually all of these leaves are gone. All of the flowers are gone. And we have these bare branches. And then a few weeks after, this transformation begins. This beautiful leaf starts out brown and unfolds and gets bigger and bigger. And eventually it becomes a full green leaf. And the entire tree again is providing shade. And I get to sit in the summer shade. I do not change in who I am. The environment around me transforms as the seasons come along. We each have a chance to go through transformation. I was a sailor. I raced solo around the world. I experienced many different things. I had one particular incident that enabled me to transform, enabled me to choose on how I'm going to respond to something. As I was finishing the last leg of the 1998 round the world race, I had just raced over 25,000 miles and I was about 1,000 miles, 2,000 miles from the finish line. I had just come out of Uruguay. And my world was changing because my girlfriend of 8 years had left me in Uruguay because she needed a different life that I could not provide. So I was pretty raw. But I was in the race, I had my head in the sea, pushing my boat, pushing myself as hard as I can because I knew this was my last race around the world. And maybe even my last transocean race. I arrive at the finish line, all the activities of the finish line. And the day after the finish, the race director comes to fetch me and he takes me for a drive. And he starts to ask me unusual questions. Questions about how fast is my boat? And how does my boat compare to another 40-footer? And how did I manage with this particular boat? And I said, no, I couldn't keep up with that boat because it was a more modern boat. I built my own boat. Yes, he built his own boat, but it was different. And he says, well, then how does it compare to a 50-footer? And I said, well, normally the 50-footers will run away from me. There's no comparison. And the questions were unusual. And I said, Mark, where is this going? What are these questions? Because this doesn't feel right. This doesn't sound right. You are fishing for something. What is it you want? So I came down to this direct communication because he was beating around the bush. And then he said to me, well, there's an accusation. Another competitor has accused you of cheating. That was a very harsh statement to make. Everything I'd gone through, all the challenges and the struggles I'd endured, never once did I think I'd be dealing with an allegation of being dishonest. My entire fabric, the roots of who I am, was raised with honesty, transparency, and integrity. And this suddenly came into question. So I asked who was asking the question, who was making the statement. And he basically made this, that this competitor had passed me about 1,200 miles, 1,500 miles from the finish line, and he struggled to keep up with me. And he had a 50-foot boat. And theoretically, as per what I had said, a 50-footer should run away from me. And this competitor said that he didn't run away from me. I overtook him a few times. I stayed with him. And therefore, in those conditions, I had to be using my engine. I had to be motoring to keep up with him. Now, instead of the race director saying to this competitor, what proof do you have behind this accusation? Did you see the engine being run? Were you close enough to see smoke coming out of the exhaust? What proof leads you to this conclusion that the sailor must have cheated? That question was never asked. Because firstly, that sailor wasn't close enough. He was on the horizon the few times we traded positions. But what was not asked either was, why was I keeping up with this boat? Now, this particular boat, at the start of the race, we had a very bad storm, and he was dismasted. He went back to South America, back to Uruguay, got a new mast quite quickly, which was shorter, and then spent weeks catching up to me. And I was under spinnaker when he caught up to me, in perfect conditions for my boat. And the reason I could hold him was he had a shorter mast. He had less sail area than he normally has, so he was not able to sail at peak optimization as I was sailing my boat at peak optimization. And he made a conclusion not based on the luck of his boat, but on an assumption that for me to sail well, I had to cheat. We have a political problem in our world where people make accusations without fully understanding what they are stating. They do not look and say, what are the circumstances? They throw something out there because they are driven by an ideology. They're driven by a belief of entitlement, that I can do as I please, and therefore you must be wrong. We have to come today into the world of facts. We cannot allow our political structures to lie. We cannot allow people to manipulate what they perceive as their set of facts that are truly lies. This competitor had no proof, but he made an accusation. The race director did not do the right thing by immediately investigating on the finish and saying, here's an accusation, what is your stand and your statement to this? And I have to do my job to investigate. So I said to the race director, let's go to the boat and let's go and check the engine seal. If the engine seal, which is placed on every start of the race, prior to the start, by the race director, if that engine seal is broken, then there could be an argument that did I cheat? But I knew that engine seal should not be broken because I know I did not cheat. I know I never engaged that engine. So I was fully within my right to say, I want a full investigation. Let's go and take a look at my engine seal. Of course, when we got on board, the engine seal was intact as he had put it. So he disconnected the engine seal. That argument was refuted. But he still wanted to see, was there a possibility? So we started up the engine and he engaged the engine to see how the propeller spins. He couldn't engage the engine. The cable that connects the engine engagement to the fitting that actually engages the gearbox, the cable was frozen. And if I had needed to engage that engine at sea to maybe rescue a fellow competitor, that would not have been possible. It didn't work. And so there was no question mark about my integrity at that point. But there was never an apology from the other competitor. There was never an ownership of his responsibility in the comment that was made. So I look at people who have backed candidates who have turned out to be liars. And I have to ask the integrity of those voters who are supporting these people, who remain silent. Do not say, I'm sorry, based on what I knew, I made an assumption and we were wrong. Their silence speaks volumes. Their silence basically asks the question, do they continue to support the lies, the dishonesty, the lack of integrity? Do they represent the stuff that is being said? Do they believe because they are ideologists? Or are they truly people who made a mistake and are going to correct that mistake? We're not going to repeat that mistake. I grew up in South Africa during apartheid, and it was a very harsh era, and I watched fascism in its fullest of forms. I was told where I could sit on a train, what restaurant I could or could not eat in, what job I could have. I lived in a fascist autocratic society of the previous South African regime during the apartheid years. I have seen this story before. And in the years after apartheid, there were many people who said, well, we never agreed with apartheid. We didn't believe in apartheid. But I have to question their integrity. Because during the apartheid era, they had all the privileges. They had the ability to vote, where I did not have that ability to vote because of the laws of the country. But they were silent. And that silence gave the Nationalist Party the ability to do the injustices they did to my fellow countrymen. And the fact when they turn around later and says, well, we disagreed with apartheid, we didn't believe in apartheid, is very insulting, because they could have changed that. They could have altered the state of the political structure in the country. But when you lack the courage, when you do not own your convictions and stand up for what is right, then the evil shall prevail. Today, as we look at political structures around the world, more and more countries are leaning towards autocracy. They are leaning towards dictatorship. They are leaning towards dishonesty and exploitation of its citizenry. We are at a very critical junction in the history of mankind. Are we going to stand up against strong men? Are we going to be vocal in the defense of justice and all kinds of rights for all human beings? Are we going to form a system that is going to work for all people? Everything is in a form of transformation. As this tree and this plant has transformed from leaves to bareness, to beautiful flowers, to beautiful leaf, to providing shade, we are at this place in society. We have to choose who will sit in the shade of the tree. How many more generations will have the beauty and the privileges that can be so taken for granted? Or are we going to be in a constant state of struggle? Are we going to allow history to rhyme and to allow the autocracy and injustice to prevail? Or will we stand up for what is right? If we stand up for people who are marginalized and say this is not correct, and then we empower everybody to stand up together to fight for our environment, our planet. We stand up and we fight for equality in economics. We can have an amazing society and amazing generations that will follow. But if we remain silent, if we say it doesn't affect me, it is not my problem, someday they will come for us. Someday we will not sit in a garden as beautiful as this, but we will sit in a barren desert. A desert barren of ideas, barren of people cooperating, of people having fellowship together, of where knowledge is cherished, ideas are shared, and lies are not tolerated. We will not tolerate our political leaders to do what they are doing today. We must stand up. We must call them out. And we must call out the people who support them, the corporations and the individuals. I want you to think about, what is your role in all of this? What have you done to contribute towards fairness, towards equality, towards lifting people up, to creating an equal opportunity for every human being and the survival of this planet? What is the message that we are going to send to future generations and the unborn generation? Are we a part of the problem, or are we going to be the solution? Let us be that solution.